Hello, everybody. You have tuned into From the Hip Radio with Joe Dockery, a 2-hour weekly podcast where you will hear great music, thoughtful commentary, and compelling interviews, along with features addressing a wide variety of subjects. From the Hip Radio will not only entertain, but Joe will encourage us all to appreciate the immense beauty that our life's journey together has to offer.
Hello, folks. I am Joe Dockery, and welcome to my second recorded podcast. I hope you had a chance to listen to the first one. I got some pretty good feedback on it. Today, we'll continue the great music, the thoughtful commentary, and compelling interviews as we speak with a survivor of the Warsaw Ghetto during the Nazi occupation of Poland during World War II. Also on today's program, we'll highlight a man who has spent a lifetime grabbing opportunities when they present themselves. I invite you to like us on Facebook, and please spread the word if you feel these podcasts are entertaining and informative. And if you'd like to comment, you can reach me at fromthehipradio@gmail.com. All right, let's get right into it. We'll start off with a local band out of the Washington, D.C. area. Here's the Dixie Power Trio and Too Much Monkey Business.
Running to and fro, hard working at the mill, never failed at the mill yet. Come a rockin' bill. Too much monkey business. Too much monkey business. Too much monkey business for me to mess around with. Seven talking to me, trying to run me up a creek. Says you can buy, go on, try, you can pay me next week. Ow. Too much monkey business. Too much monkey business. Too much monkey business for me to mess around with. Fine hair, good looking, trying to get me hooked. Want me to marry, buy a house, settle down, write a book. Oh, too much monkey business. Too much monkey business. Too much monkey business for me to mess around with. Hey. Been to Yokohama, been a fighting in the war. Army bunk, army child, army clothes, army car. Too much monkey business. Too much monkey business. Too much monkey business for me to mess around with. Working in the filling station, got too many tasks. Lock the windows, check the oil, check the tires, down the gas. Too much monkey business. Too much monkey business. Don't need your botheration. Go away, leave me. Hey.
So that's the Dixie Power Trio with Chuck Berry's classic Too Much Monkey Business. So I play that song for a couple reasons. First, it's a great song, covered by an incredibly talented band, but also because the singer and banjo player on that song moved to Stanton, Virginia years ago, where I was living at the time. His name is Bert Carlson, and you'll be hearing a lot more about him on my podcast. So one night, and this is before I had gotten to know Bert, I believe I met him that night for the first time at this gig in Stanton. I'm sitting at this table, and I felt a couple of hands from behind on my shoulders, and a guy whispering in my ear, "Captain Ernie." It was Bert, and I turned around and said, "Are you trying to freak me out, Bert?" You see, Captain Ernie, who started out as Uncle Ernie on our television station's locally produced Dixie Belle cartoon Showboat, and eventually was promoted to captain, he became the MC for that show. And that's who we watched on TV after school when I was a kid. And as it turned out, Bert grew up in Kewanee, Illinois, very near my hometown of Davenport, Iowa, separated by the Mississippi River. Bert and I are the same age, and so as it turned out, we had many of the same experiences, including watching the Dixie Belle cartoon Showboat as kids. Someone must have told him that night where I was originally from, and Bert knew that I'd react to his referencing Captain Ernie. Man, it really is a small world. We became quick friends, and we had many gigs together. And he and his wife Marion even visited us up here in Saranac Lake on 2 occasions where local musicians here in New York got to hear him play. You see, Bert was one of the best musicians Stanton ever saw, and he played all styles from rock to jazz to bluegrass. This next tune will give you an idea of Bert's incredible talent. It's a live performance of Bert on guitar and Danny Nicely on mandolin and Ralph Gordon on bass. I've been a promoter of music for nearly 30 years, promoting local concerts and festivals. We also hosted a series of house concerts, and this recording is from one of those house concerts. So now, here we go. Picture yourself on someone's backyard patio, sitting comfortably on a balmy summer evening, and you're surrounded by towering oak trees. The cicadas are singing in the background, and you're with about 80 of your closest friends, nursing your favorite beverage, and all's well with the world.
Before we forget, we don't want to forget this. We want to thank Joe and Mary Lynn one more time for having this concert here. You got a joke or anything, Danny?
Go ahead, folks. Give it up for Bert Carlson here on the red guitar. Yeah.
Give it up indeed. I'm sure you recognize that. Jimi Hendrix' Little Wing, played marvelously by the trio of Bert Carlson, Danny Nicely, and Ralph Gordon. Man, can you believe that was only a trio? And from a backyard concert, no less. We were able to get such a great recording thanks to our sound man, Gary Kirby, who recorded it straight from his soundboard. You know, it's not hard at all, by the way, to put on a house concert. I started putting on shows back in the mid-90s. It was a time when I had felt that the large venue concerts lacked the emotional response that I wanted, and frankly, what I felt I deserved with the skyrocketing ticket prices. One of our favorite places to see a show was the Birchmere in Alexandria, Virginia. Most big cities have a singing hall like this. Boston has the Club Passim. Atlanta has Eddie's Attic. The D.C. area also has Blues Alley. And Chicago has the Old Town School of Folk Music. And these are small, intimate clubs where national acts still perform. And one night, we're sitting in the Birchmere watching Greg Brown, and a light bulb went off. I thought, now here's a guy who's as good as just about anyone I've ever seen. His show is very intimate. I'm having the emotional response I want. I can hear clearly. I didn't pay an arm and a leg to get in, and I parked nearly right outside the door. And I thought, hey, I wonder if performers like him would ever want to come to Stanton and play. So I counted all the people in the room, multiplied that by the ticket price, and figured out the money that was generated. Then I figured the house probably took half that, gave the rest to the performer. And I didn't want to make any money on the deal, so we could just give it all to the performer. Well, it worked out beautifully. We secured a venue large enough to hold 125 people. We picked Thursday nights, which was still considered an off night for the performers, and started calling around to booking agents of the artists that we wanted. We offered what we thought we could afford, and soon found out the level of performer who would accept. Over the years, we booked Janice Ian, Robin and Linda Williams, Livingston Taylor, Tom Paxton, Roger McGuinn, John Sebastian, Carla Bonoff. We even got Greg Brown to come down and play. We formed a nonprofit to protect ourselves and ran the series for more than a few years. Now, that might be a little more work than you want to tackle to start out, but a house concert is much simpler. Our backyard held 75 people seated. We asked for a $10 donation, and that generated $750. Now, I do believe that $15 or even $20 is reasonable for something like this. Having a sound man is the key. He or she will cost anywhere from $125 to $200 for this type concert, so you end up with $550 at least, and could be up to $1,300 if you ask for $20 each. Believe me, it is worth the ticket price. Now, you can't get Greg Brown for that, but there are plenty of great full-time traveling musicians who will take that for a night's work. And from the quality of performer you heard with Bert's trio, you can see how professional something like that can be. If you'd like to try it out, but need a little more direction, email me at fromthehipradio@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to help you organize it. Now, before we get into our interview with Dana Fast, who escaped the Warsaw Ghetto as a young girl, I'll play a little Billie Holiday to take us back to the World War II era. This song came out in 1938, 1 year before Germany invaded Poland, where Dana grew up. Here's Billie with Lester Young on sax, Freddie Green on guitar, Papa Joe Jones on drums, and Teddy Wilson on piano, with When You're Smiling. and that's Billie Holiday and When You're Smiling. And most of the world was smiling in 1938. The United States was successfully coming out of the Great Depression. But for the Jews in Poland, there was tremendous anxiety. Anxiety that none of us listening to this podcast has ever had to experience. They knew how the Jews in Germany were being treated, and their worst fears were about to come upon them. But as fearful as they were, they could not even imagine what lies ahead. 6 million killed. I don't have to get into the details. We're all familiar with the stories. But can you even make an attempt to understand for yourself what it must have been like to be Jewish in Poland in 1939? My interview with Dana Fast is next, and she gives an account less emotional after all these years than it was when she began lecturing about her experiences years ago. But as you listen, picture yourself in her shoes. Try and feel what it was like to have your whole family living in one room, with a whole other family living in the room next to you. If you visit the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., you'll get about as close as possible to feel the anxiety, despair, and hopelessness. I know people who have not been able to get through that whole exhibit. Man's inhumanity to man is something I've never been able to understand, and on such a large scale is just impossible to imagine. And right now, we have Nazis marching the streets of our own country. They just must not understand the magnitude of what they're doing. It's all I can figure. But what if they do understand? Poland in 1939 was predominantly Catholic. I grew up Catholic, and I have seriously contemplated if I would have been the one who would have turned in my Jewish neighbor. Would I have stood by and watched it all happen? Or would I be one of the underground, risking my life to protect justice at its most threatened era? God, I hope I don't have to find out. I'm sitting here in the kitchen eating apple cake and drinking English tea with Dana Fast and her daughter Ivona Fast. I really appreciate you guys coming on From the Hip Radio.
Happy to be here, Joe.
Very good. Okay, so Dana, what I'd like to do is introduce you to everybody as a master gardener. You have really contributed a lot to Saranac Lake in your knowledge of growing things up here in the way north, and also the fact that you've kept meticulous records over the years of climate and frost and et cetera. Is that right?
Yes, and I think this is because, you see, I am a scientist. My background, I graduate with chemistry. So my background is science. When I was doing the gardening, I approached it the way I would approach everything else.
Mm-hmm. And what were some of the records that you kept?
I kept mainly the first frost, the last frost, the lowest temperature during the winter, the highest temperature during the summer, when I was able to harvest the last tomatoes, when I was able to harvest the first tomatoes. Mm-hmm. As everybody knows, tomatoes are warm weather plants. So I was harvesting my last tomatoes sometimes in August, and then at the end of August the frost came.
And when did you move here to the North Country?
1974.
All right. And have you seen things change as far as the climate is concerned since 1974?
Oh, yes, definitely.
And what have your records shown?
My records show the difference in the lowest temperature in the winter. It used to be we always had minus 40 sometime. Mm-hmm. Late winters, for the probably last 10 years, we never had minus 40.
Mm-hmm. Since I've been here, it's gotten down to 33 degrees below zero. That's about as cold as I've experienced here.
It came to minus 30 something, but it used to be always minus 40, 1 or 2 times.
Mm-hmm. So climate change is a real thing.
It is very real thing.
Mm-hmm.
I can see it. I can feel it, I can see it in the garden and in my own, you know. We never had 90 degrees, ever.
Mm-hmm. And now what I'd like to talk about is certainly your most interesting story about growing up, living in Poland. You were born what year?
I was born 1931. I was born actually at the end of Great Depression and family problems. There was the time that my father was unemployed and they had hard time.
Right. And when did the German presence come into Poland?
Germans, the World War II started in September 1st, 1939. This is where the Germans crossed the Polish border.
And
border.
you were living in Warsaw at
I
the
was
time.
living in Warsaw, and at that time, the family, well, we knew what is going on in Germany. We knew what is going on with Jews in Germany. So, of course, my father was terrified.
And you had your mother and you lived with your mother and your father and
Yes.
and siblings.
And my brother and our housekeepers, who was almost like my second mother. I loved her. She was actually saving us during the Nazi time, during World War II.
And saving you, of course, because you're Jewish.
Of course.
Right.
She wasn't.
And she was not. Okay. And
was not.
And your brother now. Your brother was younger than you.
My brother was 5 years younger.
Okay. And you lived in Warsaw. What did your father do for a living?
He was, at some point, he got his own business. You know, at that time, every woman in Warsaw, in a place like Warsaw, had the leather gloves. And this was something that every woman had, the ladies' gloves. And my father had the business. He was supplying all the glove makers in Warsaw, the women glove makers. He was supplying with the leather.
With leather for the glove makers.
For the glove maker. He had some contract with some plants in Vilnius.
And of course, you knew what was happening in Germany as far as the relationship between the Nazis and the Jews, and your father was terrified, you'd say.
Yeah.
Can you describe what was happening when the Germans actually came into Warsaw?
They marched in the main thoroughfare, main place.
When did they begin to corral the Jews and put them into what was considered the ghetto?
They closed the ghetto in 1940, in the fall of 1940. So when they came to Poland, 1939 in September, they came to Warsaw. The first year, we were still in our apartment, and 1940 they closed the ghetto. At first, our old apartment was just at the edge of the ghetto, so we were staying there. Then in 41, they made the ghetto smaller, and the house that were our apartment was beyond the ghetto, so we had to move.
Right. And were you identified as Jewish with the Star of David on your clothes? Was that something that was required?
It was required, but you had to be over 12. So I didn't have to wear the Star of David on my arms. I didn't have this armband with Star of David. Of course, my parents did.
Right. And then were you moved into the ghetto after they shrunk the size of it?
Well, they shrunk the size, and we moved the whole family into one room.
Okay. What happened to the housekeeper at that point?
The housekeeper, even when they started the ghetto, in 1940, when our apartment was still within, she couldn't stay with us because she wasn't Jewish. Well, at that time there was some kind of different thing. My mother was one of the 7 sisters. 4 out of 7 married the Gentiles. 2 of my mother's sisters were on the Aryan side. And they, of course, they cut all the contacts with all the Jewish people and all the family. Actually, they did it before, because my grandpa, whenever one girl got out of the house and married a Gentile, the grandpa cut all the contacts with them.
I see.
So it was very painful, but it was actually very good for them.
Yes, it turned out to be very good for them.
It turned out because they didn't have any contact with Jewish population after that.
Were they able to disguise their Jewish heritage then by being married to a Gentile?
Sure, they didn't. They were Catholic.
Right. So what was your living situation? Did it change while you were in the ghetto? In other words, were you able to stay with the family, or did they move other families in with you in the same building?
The first year when our old apartment was within the ghetto, we got some other people who took one of our rooms. We had 4 rooms and the kitchen. We had pretty big apartment.
Mm-hmm.
We had to move at first to 2 rooms, and then after a year, we had to move to 1 room in some common apartments, the big apartments, and we had 1 room in it.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandfather was with us too.
Mm-hmm.
So there was 4 of us plus grandpa.
In 1 room.
In 1 room.
Wow. And so were you living in fear at that time, or as a child, did you just sort of go along with where they were telling you to live?
I was 9. Children are children. They are adapting to anything. The one thing that really bothers me for that, our housekeeper couldn't be with us. I loved her very much.
Mm-hmm.
She was like my other mother.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden there was the question, why we have to move? Because we are Jewish. What do you mean we are Jewish? I didn't have any religion at home.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are Jewish. I said, well, I don't want to be Jewish. Let's be somebody else. Well, you cannot. And why Janine cannot go with us? Because she's not Jewish. I couldn't understand it.
Right.
At first.
Mm-hmm. So conditions were awfully bad. Were people able to leave the ghetto at that point, or were they
No.
they were not able to leave?
Maybe at the very, very beginning. Warsaw is a big city, and you had the apartment houses, and if they put the wall, the ghetto wall, they were houses that you could go under in the basement and come out on the other side at first. Then they sort of closed it more and more.
Mm-hmm.
But we were privileged because we had the contacts with the Aryan side. 2 of my mother's sisters were there,
Right.
married to Poles.
Right.
And we were much better. When I left the ghetto, this is where I went, to Aunt Ada.
And tell us about you leaving the ghetto. Did you just pick up and go, or did you have to sneak out?
Oh, no. I wrote it very, very detailed in the book.
So you've written a book, and it's called?
It's called My 9 Lives.
My 9 Lives. All right. Mm-hmm. And that's available if you would like to get a copy of Dana Fast's book. You could email me at fromthehipradio@gmail.com, and I'll send you the information on how to obtain that book. So what were the circumstances as you left the ghetto?
Well, my parents, especially my father, he knew what is going on. All announcement that everybody has to gather in certain place and we are going somewhere to be resettled. My father was always saying, you don't going to be resettled, you're going to be killed.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew that we have to run out, we have to get out. And of course, first they wanted to get the children out. And in 1942, in the summer, they were really transporting a lot of Jews to Auschwitz, to actually from Warsaw. It was a different one. It was Treblinka from Warsaw, but it doesn't matter. And my father knew that we have to get out.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, he wanted to get out the children first.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we had the contact. There was our old housekeeper. There was my mother's 2 sisters, married to Gentiles that were living there. So we had the contacts. We had somewhere to go.
How did you contact them?
For strange ways, they were telephones.
Mm-hmm.
You had to be a little bit careful. You cannot say what you want to say, so you had to camouflage it
Right.
a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to let them know what is going on.
So the 4 of you were able to leave together?
We didn't left together. First, my father decided, let's get the children first, because they are the most vulnerable. And it was in the middle of July, very hot day. First of all, they dressed me in everything they could because I have to have my clothing. So I was sweating, I was very hot. And I think maybe 5 o'clock in the morning, when it just started getting light, my father took us, me and my brother, to this ghetto wall, and he had some kind of agreement with somebody that he's going to get us out. Well, this guy didn't show up, and we are standing there. It is hot. There are big columns of people going out of the ghetto because there were workplaces out of the ghetto and there were some other workplaces in the ghetto. So there were a column of workers going either way. We were standing there. The situation gets really bad because as children we are not supposed to be alive. We are not supposed to be there. Mm-hmm. The gate, some door to some store or something, my father sort of pushed us there not to be seen. And he had some agreement that somebody is going to get us through, and this guy didn't show up. And at some point, there was some guy who came to my father. He saw what is going on. He said, "You want to get those two children out?" And my father said, "Yes." "Okay, I can do it for some money." And this, my father had to make the big decision. The guy that he doesn't know, maybe he would take us and take us to Gestapo, who knows? But somehow he decided the guy looks nice. He said yes. For how much money? My father got whatever he had. He said not enough. Then he had this big, they called it the onion watch, this big gold watch. And the guy said, "You give me this too." So here my father gave him this gold watch. And he's taking my brother in one hand, me in the other hand, and the columns of 8 people abreast going through. He took my brother in one hand, me in the other hand. We were going to the gate, and there was this Gestapo man. He pushed this gold watch in this Gestapo man's hand, and we went.
Goodness.
Just like this.
Wow.
I am pretty sure that the guy, he knew, this Gestapo man, he knew that he's taking bribes, because, we could be stopped. It is column 8 people, and here are the 2 children in the middle of the column of 8.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So the fellow who got you out then, what did he do with you after that, after he gave the watch to the Gestapo?
He went with us, and then we are already on the other side, and he looks at us and he said, "Okay, guys, we are going for breakfast." Okay, we are going for breakfast. And I remember this, I was 11 years old. We came to some little coffee shop or something that you're coming down on the stone steps. This is what stick to my mind. Mm-hmm. And the other thing, he put us at the table and he gave us breakfast. He bought the breakfast at this place. And I still remember we got the hot rolls with ham and tea.
Hot rolls and ham.
40 years later, I talked to my brother and I said, "Do you remember?" He was 6 years old at that time. "Do you remember anything from this day?" And he said, "Oh yeah, hot rolls with ham. I never have anything so good." We agreed together that we both remember from these days hot roll with ham.
That's great. So how did you get a hold of your mother's sisters?
Well, this was the last thing that my father told me, whisper in my ear. "You go there, and in this and this square, Kiliński Square, near the garden that you always go to play, Janina, our old housekeepers, will be standing on the bus stop. If you go with this guy and you see her, try to lose him. I don't want him to see her on the other lips." He wasn't sure of this guy.
Sure.
And we were going there, and then I saw Janina with corner of my eyes. We look at each other, and there was corner of 2 streets. There is big square with the statue of Polish Jan Kiliński, and she was standing on the bus stop there. I saw her, and I told to this guy, "This is this house, we are going there." The first corner house that was there, I let him go. I said, "This is it, we don't need you anymore, thank you very much."
And he cooperated.
He cooperated, he left. So I took my brother in my hand, and went down to the bus stop to see Anina. And this was it. And I saw her and I knew everything will be fine.
Wow. So then how did you hook up with your family then, with your parents?
As I told you, they were telephones. And of course, Aunt Ada could contact my father, but of course she couldn't tell him what. And I remember this phone call when she was saying, okay, and both packages came fine.
The Eagles have landed.
Yeah, the Eagles have landed. I got both packages in good shape.
Well, that was wonderful to be. I'm sure that they were so happy to hear.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
And then how long was it before you were reunited with your parents?
I never was reunited with my father.
No. Tell me what happened.
I went, first of all, our first stage, Aunt Ada's had some friend, school friend, and the school friend had some brother. The brother was country teacher in some deep country, and they arranged that they will take us. So we went to this deep country and we were there in this country teacher's house.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there for half a year. My brother was there for 3 months. They didn't want him any longer because they were afraid, you know. The boys were harder and he was little. And they kept me longer.
And these are non-Jews?
No, they were Polish.
Mm-hmm. But non-Jew Polish?
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
right. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so your brother left, and where did he go?
He went to those people that she stayed with till the end of the war.
Mm-hmm.
The one that I told you that he was working on the streetcars.
Right.
And he was the member of Polish Socialist Party, and he agreed to take him. And my brother went there and stayed there till the end of the war.
Right, and your father wanted to see him, you were mentioning to me. If you could explain that to the audience.
Yeah. There was, later, probably a year later, he was still with the family Wrubels. And my father said, I wanted to see my boy.
Mm-hmm.
He went there, and it just happened that the Gestapo came to the house looking for somebody else. And my father was there, and there was, who are you? Why are you here? You go with us. And they took him out. This was like, there was Warsaw suburbs, the small houses with the little streets.
Yes.
And he decided that he might be discovered, and he started running, and the Germans shoot him.
And they shot him, and that's how your father died.
This is how my father died. This was, I think, in May 43.
Mm-hmm. Now, your mother, then, how did you get reunited with her? Was it after the war, or?
Well, at the very end of the war.
Uh-huh. Was she able to get out of the ghetto, or
They were both got out of the ghetto.
They did, okay.
My mother had 2 sisters, so my mother spent the rest of the war with her. Aunt Ada was her sister. Her husband had a very good position in the Polish railroad. The older sister, married architect. He was half German. She married him, and they lived in suburb of Warsaw. They had nice house with a big garden. And my mother stayed with her other sister till the end of the war.
Was your mother able to stay in contact with you during these times?
I think I saw my mother once or twice. Once there was Uncle Emil, which was my Aunt Genia's husband, the one that I told you he was half German.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
He took us and took the train. We went by train to this deep country.
Mm-hmm.
He went with us and left us there.
Mm-hmm.
And then, when those people decided they cannot keep us anymore, well, I can understand it. There were a lot of underground. And since this was in eastern Poland, the underground was Soviets and Polish.
Right.
There were all kind of partisans, this and that, and they were blowing up trains. And the Germans were retaliating. They pacifying the villages.
Mm-hmm.
They rounded all the people from the village. They put them in the old barn, and they put the barn on fire.
Mm.
And this was how they retaliating
Mm-hmm.
for everything. And something like this happened in the neighboring village, and the people who had us were very scared.
Mm-hmm.
Of course they are. And first, they didn't want my brother. So Uncle Emil came and took Jurek, and from there on, he went to this family, Rubers, to this guy that I told you about.
Mm-hmm.
And he was with this family till the end of the war.
Mm-hmm. But your brother and your mother and yourself, you were all reunited at the end of the war.
At the end of the war. At the end of the war was very, very strange because, as I say, my mother was with her older sister and this Uncle Emil on this little suburban house. They lived there in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was at that time, I went different places. First I was in this deep country, then after these people got scared when the few villages were what I call pacified,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't want to take any responsibility for somebody else's children. And then I went, my second place was the orphanage run by Sister of the Charity.
Mm.
And there was over 100 orphans there. And I can tell you, I wasn't the only Jewish orphan. There were some others. Nobody was talking about, of course. I might sort of suspect that this one is sort of a little different than the others.
Mm-hmm.
But of course I didn't know anything.
Mm-hmm. And then where did you meet up with your mother then after the end of the war?
Well, there was after this, one day the Germans pulled out and got one of the kids that somebody denounced. And at that point, when the Gestapo took some of the kids, my mother and at that time my father was still alive, they were scared, they took me out. They took me out and then I went to some older woman who was far. I told you that my uncle was half German.
Yes.
There was his sister, who was at that time in her 50s. She took me. I stayed with her since 1944. The last year, 1944, I was with her.
Wonderful. Okay. So Dana, tell me about your education then. You went to high school whereabouts?
Yes, after World War II, we moved back to Warsaw. I lived with my mother. My father was dead. My mother was working. My brother was with us. I was active in the Polish Girl Scout at that time. And I graduated from high school in 1950. And then I went to study chemistry in what they call Warsaw Polytechnical School. It was something like MIT. I got my degree, I graduated there. I got my degree in 1956.
Very good. And then what kind of
56.
work did you do after you graduated with your master's in chemistry?
I worked in Poland. There was Industrial Institute. We were doing actually research on polymers, mostly like the rubber polymers and some other, because my specialty was polymers. And the biggest thing, that the polymers are so durable.
Mm-hmm.
They don't decompose. Mm-hmm. And we thought it was the greatest thing in the world.
Right.
Now we know that it is not that great.
Right.
Because everything in nature should decompose.
Right. So, and then what year did you decide that you wanted to go to Israel?
After World War II, I think there was some agreement between Ben-Gurion at that time and the Polish Communist Party, the Polish head of the Polish government, that he's going to let all the Jews to Israel. There was in 1957. My family, my mother and my brother and some of the family, whoever survived the war, left Poland in between 57 and 58. At that time I had Ivona, I was married, and I stayed in Poland.
Mm-hmm.
I stayed in Poland, I didn't think I would go. But then life changed, my marriage fell apart, my whole family is there. The situation in Poland at that time was really very bad. There was crisis, it was horrible. What you were earning, they were like pitiful, you can barely survive. And at that time my family in Israel started bugging me, come here, come here, come here. So in 1962, I just took Ivona and went there. I wasn't quite sure if I'm staying there, but it was sort of, we will see. I stayed in Israel. At that time, my family was going to the States, and they say, we will go to the States and you put your papers in the U.S. Embassy. So I did. And they went first, actually, they was like a few months before me. And then I went to the States in 1964. So I was in Israel 2 years, not quite 2 years.
Right.
I came to United States, and at first I came to Chicago, and I got the job because my master was in biochemistry.
Mm-hmm.
So I got the job in University of Chicago in biochemistry department.
At the University of Chicago.
University of Chicago.
Wonderful.
And I was there for 1 year, and then we moved to Philadelphia, and I worked for 3 years in Penn State, not Penn State, this is University of Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm. And then after...
And in biochemistry department. Then I lived 6 years in Syracuse, New York, and I was working in upstate medical, doing some kind of research too.
Mm-hmm. And then
at that time, I was coming here for vacation.
Here to the Adirondacks.
The Adirondacks, I really like it. And my dream was, if I can get a job here, I will move tomorrow. Huh. And then I found out about Trudeau Institute.
The Trudeau Institute.
Yeah, mm-hmm. And I got the job in Trudeau Institute. So I worked there for 3 years. We moved here. I worked there for 3 years. Then I worked for 11 years probably in Cell Science Center. And this is why I'm here.
Wonderful. Well, it's great that we have you up here. Again, My 9 Lives is available. Just email me at fromthehipradio@gmail.com, and we'll see if we can't get a copy out to you. Dana, thank you so much for being on From the Hip Radio. I really appreciate the interview.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
Mein Schwester Chaye mit de grüne Augen, mein Schwester Chaye mit de schwarze Zepp, de Schwester Chaye was hat mich der Zeugen, aufs Motsche Gassen Haus mit krumme Trepp. Die Mame ist weg von Stubaginnen, wenn auf den Himmel hat erst kein Geld. Sie ist weg in Kromereien verdienen, das biedne drobne Grosche dicke Geld. Und der Chaye ist geblieben mit den Brüdern, und sie hat sie gekormet und gehielt. Und sie pflegte singen, sie die schöne vor Nacht, wenn kleine Kinder werden mit. Mein Schwester Chaye mit de grüne Augen, mein Schwester Chaye mit de lange Augen, die Schwester Chaye, was hat mich der Zeugen, ist noch nicht alt gewesen, kennt's endlich Jahr. Sie hat geräumt, gekocht, erlangt das Essen. Sie hat gezwungen uns die Kleider samme letzter Wasser Ziege schreib ich häufig dich meine Lieder, entdeck die schreckliche von unserer Zeit. Bei Gott allein ist sie Abbas Yechide, in Himmel sitze bei sein rechter Seite. Vor ihr schreib ich häufig dich meine Lieder, entdeck die schreckliche von unserer Zeit. Gott allein ist sie Abbas Yechide, in Himmel sitze bei sein rechter Seite. Ah, ah, ah,
And those are the Klezmatics with Chava Alberstein on vocals. All right, let's pick it up just a bit. Here are the Allman Brothers from the album Eat a Peach. You know, these guys were incredibly influential, and for such young musicians, they're still in their 20s at this time. Yeah, they mixed blues and rock like so many other bands had done up to that point, but with their southern flair, they invented both the jam band concept and the southern rock sound, both copied by so many others to come along. Here are the Allman Brothers and One Way Out.
just don't know. Oh, you tell me.
Now, here's a scary good musician. His name is Joe Craven, and he is easily my percussion hero. I got to see Joe with the David Grisman Quintet in the 90s. Then, just a couple of years ago, up here in Saranac Lake, I hired him to perform solo in concert. And while he was here, he also conducted a very upbeat educational program in our elementary school. Well, not only does Joe Craven play all the percussion on this song, but he plays every other instrument except for the bass guitar. He invited me on stage to play percussion with him at that concert, and I had the time of my life. He even got Mary Lynn up and taught her some fiddle. He had her walking around on stage just to help her keep time and had her sawing away on that fiddle in no time. It was like magic. Here's Joe Craven with his Caribbean-influenced version of Liberty. And that's Joe Craven with Liberty. So, years ago, there was this circuit preacher, one of these guys who couldn't make enough money in one town because there are just so few people that he would travel on his horse from town to town and give his sermons. And over the years, the horse had become quite religious himself and would only respond to two commands. If you wanted it to go, you'd have to say to the horse, "Praise the Lord." If you wanted the horse to stop, you had to say, "Amen." Years later, the preacher wanted to retire, and so he thought he'd sell the horse. So he found a buyer, and they agreed on a price. And before the guy took off, he says, "Hey, this horse responds to two commands. If you want it to go, you got to say, 'Praise the Lord.' You want that thing to stop, and you better say, 'Amen.'" The guy says, "Yeah, right, okay." So he hops up on the horse and, "Giddy up." No, the horse doesn't go anywhere. "Giddy up." No, still, the horse does not go anywhere. He digs in the spurs, flaps the reins. "Giddy up." No, the horse doesn't go anywhere. Oh, boy. So he's a little embarrassed. He looks to his right and he looks to his left, see if anybody's looking, and he kind of whispers, "All right, Praise the Lord. And oh my gosh, like a bat out of you-know-where, that horse just took off. Well, it was starting to get a little bit out of control. It was not slowing down. The guy looks up and he sees he's coming to the edge of this cliff. Oh my God. Whoa, whoa. No, the horse does not stop. Whoa, whoa. The horse does not stop. Whoa, whoa. The horse does not stop. That cliff is coming nearer and nearer. And all of a sudden he says, okay, amen. And the horse stops right at the edge of the cliff. Oh, the guy looks over the edge, wipes his brow and says, praise the Lord.
Wait a minute, isn't that Ray Benson? Hey, Ray.
Hey, Huey.
Hey, mind if I sing this one?
Oh, you go right ahead.
Wagon load of trouble, big steep hill to climb. Honey, she done left me. I ain't got a dime. Keep hubbing it, son. Hit your wagon load. Keep right on hubbing it down that lonesome road.
Professor.
Johnny Gable. Hey, Ray. How's the world been treating you? Made your fortune yet?
The world ain't been treating me. I paid for what I get. Keep
Hubbing it, son. Hit your wagon low. Keep right on hubbing it down that lonesome road.
Herbie. Got it, Cindy.
Some folks born to lose, some folks born to win.
Yeah. Some folks born to hub it, and that's where I come in.
Keep hubbing it, son. Hit your wagon low. Keep right on hubbing it down that lonesome road. I pull tons of cotton. I hold fields of corn. Guess I'll be hubbing it till Gable blows his horn. Keep hubbing it, son. Hit your wagon low. Keep right on hubbing it down that lonesome road. Down that lonesome road.
And that's Asleep at the Wheel with Hubbin' It, featuring Huey Lewis as a guest vocalist doing a duet with Ray Benson. I've mentioned in the past that I practiced chiropractic for 41 years, having graduated from Palmer College of Chiropractic in Davenport, Iowa. And as I look back, I credit my friendship with 3 people for getting me through school successfully. When I was in undergraduate school, I thought I'd major in economics, minor in Spanish, and move to the Southwest and open up my own business of some kind. And it was a really good plan. Well, so I thought. I took economics my first year, and I just could not wrap my brain around it. There seemed to be nothing concrete, like 2 + 2 = 4. It was all about trends and subjective analysis, and I clearly do better with more concrete subjects. Spanish was going well, but I didn't want to major in it. I figured at that time that it would not lead me to being self-employed. Then I took a class in general anatomy and physiology, simply to fulfill a science requirement. It was a class on the systems of the body. I learned about the cardiovascular system, the digestive system, the skeletal system, the neurological system, etc. And not only the basic anatomy and physiology of each system, but how each worked, not independently, but how they were dependent on each other for the good of the whole. I had never been so stimulated by an academic subject as I was during and after that class. It led me to my decision to enter chiropractic college, conveniently located right there in my hometown. You see, chiropractic was developed by D.D. and B.J. Palmer, a father and son who located to Davenport and founded not only the profession, but the college that bears their name. But I had no background in biology or chemistry, and little did I know I was about to get quite a rude awakening. As fate would have it, on that first day of orientation, I ran into an acquaintance of mine, a colleague in the local music scene. His name is Bill Rector. We decided to meet up for lunch that day, and when we met, he was with two other fellas, Boyd Hulse and Larry Hurd. Bill was in the same situation as I was, not having a science background. He just ran into these other two fellas and invited them to lunch. As it turned out, Boyd had a 4-year degree in biology, and Larry had a 4-year degree in chemistry. They had gone to undergraduate school together at Northeast Missouri State. I tell you, it was a match made in heaven. Since Bill and I were local and connected to the social scene, we were just what Boyd and Larry were looking for. And us, not having been reared in the sciences, Boyd and Larry were just what Bill and I needed. So in exchange for their expertise, we were able to give them an advanced degree in sociology, if you know what I mean. In chiropractic school, they give you the curriculum. There's no electives in the main study course. So the four of us had every class together. We sat together, had lunch together every day, and studied for every test together. I don't believe I would have gotten through without the support of these three friends. And Bill was great at introducing me to new music. In the 70s, during our years together, he introduced me to Bob Marley and the Wailers, Frank Zappa, Dan Hicks and his Hot Licks, John Prine, and especially this group. Here's the ultimate band who mixed rock with country and New Orleans jazz to produce a gumbo so tantalizing I traveled far and wide over the years to see them live. This goes out to Boyd, Bill, Larry, with heartfelt appreciation. Little Feat, from Waiting for Columbus, one of the greatest live albums of all time, and Fat Man in the Bathtub.
bathtub with the blues. I hear you moan, I hear you moan, I hear you moan,
And that's Little Feat with Fat Man in the Bathtub. Have you ever noticed there are people in this world who seem to possess a higher than usual intuitive sense? And more than just intuition, but they seem to have the ability to sense energies that the average person does not recognize. They seem to look at the world through a completely different lens than the rest of us. You find these people in all walks of life. My wife Mary Lynn and I describe these folks as having the gift. Some acquire it after a near-death experience or serious illnesses, like the shaman of indigenous societies. But most of these people are just born with it. And many of these people don't even recognize it as being something special. For them, it just is. And the ones who truly have it don't go around advertising it. They simply live their lives in whatever endeavor they've chosen to express themselves. But these abilities or this gift can be very healing for the rest of us who come in contact with these folks. The best way to describe my own state of being after coming in contact with one of these people is the experiencing of a sense of centering, a grounding in who I am. It's as if there's been an internal reorganizing of my own energies, allowing me to just go out and be Joe Dockery more effectively. And rarely am I around these people that soon after I don't create something special myself, or tie up a loose end, or simply see a current issue with more clarity. Derek McGowan, a musician, silversmith, and healer from the small village of Ahagower in County Mayo in the west of Ireland, he has the gift. His daughter Lisa, she does too. John Glick, a medical doctor and musician in Virginia, he has the gift. And Sister Faith Schuster of Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas, she had the gift while she was here on earth. The feeling of centeredness when listening to Miles Davis makes me believe he had the gift too. And this is not illusory or some far-out, unbelievable, wacky phenomenon, not when you look at it from an evolution perspective and how the human species has evolved. We have become rulers of this planet, not because of individual strength, but through our superior specialization. You know, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, the doctor, lawyer, Indian chief. We all have our specific jobs and talents that all together contribute to a successful society. Not only have we intellectually divvied up the responsibilities for peaceful collective living, but I argue that we come into this world with different personalities, different traits and affinities for certain work, so that we can even more effectively ensure our species' survival. You know what I mean? Some people are just born to be artists. Some are born to be leaders. Some are healers. Some are warriors. Others are teachers. These traits make up an archetype. And no one is strictly one particular archetype, but we all have qualities of a few different archetypes, but with some more dominant than others. We will address these at length and in detail in another podcast, but for now it would be good for you to take a look at a list of archetypes and see where you land. Me? I know with my sensitivity to people's physical problems, my athletic abilities, my lanky physical build, and a penchant for working in my own business that I am tailor-made to be a chiropractor. I may have a bit of warrior in me, but by no means could I be considered a warrior. That's not my contribution. And while I am against war, I nonetheless honor the warrior. I honor the warrior because I know he or she is a vital part of being human. We need the warrior as much as we need the poet in our quest for a balanced and ultimately successful evolving species. Recently, my good friend Hida Maria, a woman firmly grounded in what the earth has to teach us, gave me a heads up on a 4-night workshop being given on the 4 elements: air, water, earth, and fire. The seminar was being given by Mary Bennett through her business, Free to Fly. Now, I realize that modern science, through the periodic table and the study of atoms, has shown our world to be made up of many more elements than air, water, earth, and fire. But studying the traditional 4 elements can be extremely beneficial, as it inevitably ties us to the physical world that is so vital to our survival. The element air is associated with our breath and thought and the ever-changing nature of our lives. Water represents the healing qualities of our world, our emotions and intuition. And earth represents grounding, logic, stability, and strength. But it was Mary's class on the element fire that seemed to have an immediate effect on me. Within days after the class, the idea of producing this podcast came to my mind. And with all the passion, creativity, and taking action that the element of fire represents, I outlined the framework of what I'd like to do with this endeavor. It was then just a matter of a little research and gumption, and voila, here we are. Experiencing that moment of clarity is why I believe that Mary Bennett has the gift too, and I am grateful. Now this leads me into my next interview. So here's a guy who does not necessarily have the gift I'm talking about, but is a guy who seems to dwell smack dab in the middle of the element of fire. His fire in the belly attitude not only has made him successful, but has made life better for countless other people. He's an inspiration to me with his antennas constantly waving in the air, picking up all the sensation around him, mixing that information with his endless curiosity and can-do attitude, and ultimately creating something constructive for himself and those around him. His name is Clyde Rabideau, and I met him in 2011 when I first purchased my office in Saranac Lake with plans on moving here after my 32 years in Stanton, Virginia. Clyde is the owner of Rabideau Corp., a contracting company that I hired to do work at our new place. Now, after Clyde was raving about all that Saranac Lake had to offer, I flippantly said, "Well, geez, Clyde, you ought to be mayor." And he said, "Well, Joe, I am the mayor." As a matter of fact, back when he was 33 years old, Clyde became mayor of a much larger town, Plattsburgh, New York, and enjoyed 5 terms as mayor of that community. He's made it through 2 terms here in Saranac Lake and is now nearing retirement himself. Now, the reason I'm interviewing Clyde is because of one incident in his life that represents what I'm talking about. One of many that I believe exemplifies the expression of the element of fire. He saw an opportunity and he took it. He didn't know how it was going to turn out, but he anticipated an opportunity, prepared himself, and when the moment presented itself, Clyde was ready to take action. And now all you Iowa folks will really appreciate this, as well as anyone else interested in the sport of wrestling. You see, Clyde Rabideau, he wrestled Dan Gable. Now, many of you won't remember who Dan Gable is, but just imagine going one-on-one with Michael Jordan, or thinking of coming to the plate to face Nolan Ryan, or facing Serena Williams on the other side of a tennis court, or yourself having to pitch to Babe Ruth or Henry Aaron. At the Munich Summer Olympics in 1972, Gable beat 6 opponents, 3 by pins, and all without giving up a single point to decisively win the gold medal, and nursing a knee injury no less. He had an incredible college career at Iowa State University, winning 2 national championships. He went on to coach at Iowa University, where he won 15 national championships and 21 Big Ten championships. I remember when preparing for the Olympics, the sports world deemed him the greatest athlete in the world. We were all very proud back in Iowa, and Dan Gable was and is our hero. So here's my interview with Clyde, who will fill you in. All right, I'm sitting here with Clyde Rabideau. Clyde, thank you so much for joining us today on From the Hip Radio.
Joey, you are hip.
So, as I said in the introduction, Clyde he wears many, many hats, and he will be on the podcast many times in the future because he's a pretty interesting guy. And but there is one thing that I want to speak to you about today, and that's an experience that you had with Dan Gable years ago. But before we get into that, I would just like to know, how tall are you?
Right now?
No,
right now, as
yeah.
I'm 64 and a half years old, I'm 5'7" and 1/4 inch. I
How
lost
about-
3/4. I was 5'8" at one time.
Sorry about that. Okay, so you were 5'8" in high school.
Yes.
And what did you weigh in high school?
Football, 165.
Okay, football 165. And what was your position in football?
Nose guard, middle guard.
Nose
Defense.
guard at 5'8", And what did you wrestle at in high school? What was your wrestling weight?
132.
And then in college, what was your wrestling weight in college?
Let's talk about college here. I go to college at West Point, July 7th, 1974, and I get on the Toledo scales. You know those big farm scales?
Yes.
And the arrow goes to 167. Must have had a wild night before I went to West Point. And the wrestling coach, Leroy Alex, is standing behind me. He goes, "How the hell are you going to make 132?
132. So to give everybody a perspective, Dan Gable did wrestle in the 130s, 135 I believe, in college, and it was 150 when he wrestled internationally.
Yeah.
So you and Mr. Gable are about the same size. So that's the one thing I just wanted to impress on everybody is the fact that Clyde volunteered to be a nose guard in football, and you had a pretty good football team, did you not?
We had a good team. I made the all-star team. Because when you're 5'8", 165 pounds, you got to be fast.
The other thing that impressed me, that leads me into the main topic of today's discussion, is you in your 30s were the mayor of Plattsburgh, New York, correct?
Yes, at 33 years old, mayor of Plattsburgh. Population 21,000 at the time.
21,000, and you also you had 2 terms there, correct?
5, but who's counting?
5 terms, my goodness. And then after 5 terms of mayor of Plattsburgh, New York, then you ran for lieutenant governor of the state of New York.
It was during those 5 terms.
Uh-huh.
Which probably led to my demise in 6th term.
Right. But you were endorsed by the New York Times.
New York, I was interviewed by the Gray Lady editorial board off Broadway in New York City. Came away, boy, I had sweat on my forehead then. But it was a grueling interview, but they endorsed my candidacy. It was a highlight. It was a lot of fun. We should talk about that someday.
So now, you and your wrestling. You wrestled in high school, and you wrestled at West Point, and then you wrestled at
Clarkson
University.
Yes.
Clarkson University. So tell me about your wrestling. Anything you'd like to add?
I was never like the superstar in college, but I was in high school. But that's okay. That's okay.
And what year did you graduate from Clarkson?
1978.
You and Dan Gable wrestled about the same weight. Were you aware of Dan Gable when you were a wrestler?
Oh, my God. He was the hero. He was the man. And he had only won a gold medal in the Olympics before I tangled with him. That's all.
That's right. And tell us the circumstances
okay, here's the deal.
of how you tangled
he
with him.
wins the gold medal in freestyle wrestling, downing some Russian, back then it was a Soviet, in the finals. And then retires from actively wrestling and coaches Team USA for the 1976 Olympics in Montreal, as we Frenchmen say. In Plattsburgh, New York, 60 miles from Montreal, is the training center for Olympic athletes the week before the Olympics begin. So Dan Gable brings all the best wrestlers from across the US of A to Plattsburgh State University College Gymnasium, and he is there. And I don my wrestling tights.
So were there other people who wore singlets to the exhibition?
Sure, all the Olympic wrestlers, all the champions from across the country were there. So anyway, there was like a lull in the action at the beginning of the practice for these Olympic wrestlers, and Mr. Gable, Dan Gable, standing in the center of the mat. I walk out there in my singlet, my shoes, my flowing Fabio hair, and I said, "Mr. Gable, can I do a few takedowns with you?" And I did. I said, "Mr. Gable."
Sure.
I was too afraid to say, "Hey, Dan, let's do some takedowns." So I said, and he said, "Sure." So we did. So you tie up with your opponent in the wrestling match. So I tie up with him.
Yeah.
You put your hand around his neck. He puts his hand around my neck. And I'm going, "Oh my God, Dan Gable! I got my hand around Dan Gable's neck." So I did this crazy thing. I just felt, a little loose. What the hell? I just went out in the mat and challenged Dan Gable to some takedowns. So I did a big sweep behind with my left leg, trying to draw Dan Gable over for an ankle pick. Mm-hmm. And that is when he brings his right ankle towards me, I drop down because I got my hand on his neck, and I put my left hand behind his ankle, and I just snapped like going to take him down. And just for a nanosecond, I felt it. It was right at that critical moment of balance when you can just feel you got him. And in that nanosecond, Dan Gable said, "What the hell is this kid doing?" So he snapped his ankle back, shucked me. That's when you shuck a guy past you, and took me down like boom, crumpled me like a cheap paper bag. But hey, we won a few more takedowns. That was about it. He had to go with practice, and I walked off the mat, the happiest wrestler in the world, because I wrestled Dan Gable, the god of the wrestling universe.
I love that story, Clyde. And were there people who actually watched that and thought, "Oh my
Oh
God,
yeah, we had
balls?"
there was hundreds of local wrestlers in the stands, and this one nitwit, his first name was Terry, says, "Oh, you look like a fool out there." I said, "Yeah, you're the fool. You're sitting in the stands, and I wrestled Dan Gable. Who's the fool between you and me, pal?"
And did anyone get a photo of you?
Yes. Don Evans has a photo, and it's like a Polaroid, and I'm off in the distance, and I'm standing up with grabbing his arms around my waist, and I'm trying to take his his Olympic arms off my waist.
Right.
And my head is down, but you can see my Fabio hair.
Wow.
And me a little bit.
Yeah, but still, you can digitize that thing and make it look,
I can look even better than I was.
Well, I don't know about looking any better, but at least you might be able to make out Dan Gable's face. So taking us back now to your decision, you obviously, when you put your singlet on before you left home that day, you realized, okay, I am going to, if I get a chance, ask him if he won't grapple with me for a short period of time.
Yeah. What the heck? What do you got to lose,
right? Well, that's foresight, though.
It was. He's the greatest. Always will be the greatest.
Oh yeah.
Can I talk about one other Iowa wrestler real quick?
Yeah, sure.
Mike Natvig.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the assistant coach at West Point when I was there, and the only national wrestling champion cadet when he was a cadet, class of '63. He won the nationals '62 and '63 from Osage, Iowa. Here's the interesting thing about Mike Natvig. He went to the University of Iowa for 1 year, then transferred to West Point. And then when I was there in 1974-75, he was the assistant wrestling coach. And we were in awe of him. And he was just the nicest guy. And just his tenor alone and his calmness was a great comfort and value to me as a young cadet wrestler, earning my Army A in my plebe year.
Wow.
You know what sports is all about? It's character building.
Mm-hmm.
Character is everything.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk about character someday.
We will. All right, well, Clyde, thank you very much for joining me on From the Hip Radio, and we will definitely see you on down the road, and thank you so much for your comments.
I love you, Joey. It's my pleasure.
Thank you very much, Clyde.
She's in me, always with me, tiny dancing in my hand. Jesus freaks out in the street, handing tickets out for gold. Turning back, she just laughs. The boulevard is not that bad. Piano man, he makes a stand in their auditorium. just for the band. Pretty eyed pirate smile. You marry a music man. Ballerina, you must have seen her dancing in the sand. Now she's in me, always with me. Tiny dancer in my hand. Oh, how it feels so real, lying here with no one near, only you, and you can hear me when I say softly, slowly. Hold me closer, tiny dancer. Count the headlights on the highway. Lay me down in sheets of landing. You had a busy day today. Hold me closer, tiny dancer. Count the headlights on the highway. Lay me down in sheets of landing. You had a busy day today.
And that's Elton John, of course, with his song Tiny Dancer, written about the wife at the time of Bernie Taupin, Elton John's lyricist and longtime songwriting partner. That song is on the album Madman Across the Water from 1972. And Elton John had already been on our radar at that time because the year before we were mesmerized by his album Tumbleweed Connection. It was a sound we were not used to at the time. It was rock, but the arrangements were more sophisticated, and he incorporated country themes into the music. Not many bands have been using the piano so out front. Now, the Beatles certainly did with songs like Hey Jude and Let It Be, but Elton John featured the piano as much as he featured his voice, calling back and forth like a conversation he was having between himself and the piano. It set me up for the New Orleans sound I was exposed to when we went up to Iowa City in my junior year in high school, 1972, to see the band Hot Tuna. But opening for Hot Tuna that night was Dr. John, the Night Tripper, and he took the stage in a carnival flurry, lit up the rhythm and blues in me, and led me into a world of music I love to this day. Here's Dr. John with Mess Around.
Down
And while we're hanging around New Orleans, how can we leave without playing the Neville Brothers? Here's Congo Square.
Well, it might be superstitious, but some kind of something is going on down there. Well, it might be superstitious, but some kind of something is going on down there. Well, it's an old-time tradition when they play their drums at night in Congo Square. You can hear 'em in the distance, and the old folks up the bayou say your prayer. You can hear 'em in the distance, and the old folks up the bayou say your prayer. That's when them voodoo people gather, and they play their drums at night in Congo Square. Well, my eyes would not believe it, but what I seen that night I could not turn away. Well, my eyes would not believe it, but what I seen that night I could not turn away. They had that mojo emotion, and I seen them dancing and prancing with that sleigh. Me, Billy Green on love. Might be superstitious, but some kind of something is going on down there. Well, it might be superstitious, but some kind of something is going on down there. Well, it's an old-time tradition when they play them drums at night in Congo.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, the Neville Brothers in Congo Square. So we're about ready to wrap it up, my second podcast, and I really appreciate you sticking around. If you'd like to help me fine-tune this program, You can email your comments to fromthehipradio@gmail.com. Love to hear from you. And be sure to like us on Facebook. And please spread the word if you feel this program is interesting, entertaining, and informative. And now, once again, we'll close the show with a lullaby from the great Freda Epstein. As I said before, I dedicate this whole podcast venture to her memory. May I appreciate my audience as much as she did hers, careful not to waste their time. See you next week.
Mama is rocking you in the soft nest.